I recently saw a tweet from The Athletic talking about current NBA players who are locks to make the Hall of Fame. And there's about 15 guys on that list. And I went down to the comment section. A lot of people were saying, too many guys on the list. What is this dude done to deserve this? What has this dude done to deserve this? Basically, a lot of people felt like, 15 was too high of a number. And that made me want to make a video kind of making my own list, because I think that not only are there 15 locks and that everybody they had on their list is a lock to make the Hall of Fame, but I think there's easily more than that. So in this video, I'm going to go through every current NBA player who would make the Hall of Fame if their career ended today. So there's some guys who are pretty obviously on really good pace to be Hall of Famers, who are maybe like 27 or 25 or whatever, and they just haven't racked up the accolades yet. I'm not going to count them, although there are a few younger guys on here. So we're just going off what the players have actually done. I'm not projecting at all. So like Devin Booker, for example, not going to be on this list, but here are my guys I think are going to make the Hall of Fame. Before we get into it, I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. This is going to seem like a lot of players, and it is, and that's kind of why I'm making this video. I think people's expectations of what a player needs to do in the NBA, what they need to accomplish to become a pro basketball Hall of Famer, are way out of whack and pretty far off of what the reality is. And I understand that a lot of those people, and the common sentiment between NBA fans is they're saying, well, the Hall lets in way too many players. And I understand that. I get it. But that doesn't mean that's what the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame is actually doing. So when we get towards like the end of this list and I'm getting, more and more kind of borderline guys, I think a lot of people are going to disagree, and a lot of people are going to want to comment, it's ridiculous that this player and this player and this player are even being considered for the Hall of Fame. And I've been talking about this all summer on Twitter. If you've seen me on there, some of the guys that I'll talk about who I think are pretty solidly going to make it are getting like a lot of pushback where most people disagree with me. So I understand a lot of people's opinions on how the NBA has Hall of Famers and how the pro basketball has Hall of Famers is too lax and it's too easy. I get that. But we're talking about what will happen more so rather than what should happen. That being said, though, let me give you my defense real quick of why the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame seems to let in so many NBA players. When you're talking about the NFL Hall of Fame, it's the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but it's really the NFL Hall of Fame because there aren't that many other American football leagues that are like producing serious talent, right? So when you want to figure out how difficult it is to get into that hall, you look at, okay, what percentage of NFL players make it, right? When you're talking about the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame, it's the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame, and that's actually a global sport with actual other serious leagues around the world. The problem is that people won't take that into account, and they'll try to look at what percentage of NBA players make it to the Hall of Fame as a judgment of how difficult it is to make it. But the thing is that the NBA is already like the top players from around the world. For the most part, I understand the Euro League has plenty of good players who could play in the NBA, but for the most part, confined into like the already boiled down to like the top 500 guys. So just by making it to the NBA, it's already narrowed down a lot more than making it to the NFL is, right? So what you have to accomplish in a league where it has all of the best players in the world already is a little bit lower. So you think about being like a top 25 player in the world 5 times. In the NFL, that'll probably get you into the Hall of Fame. In the NBA, it might as well, but that's going to look as like 5 All-Stars, and that doesn't seem like it should be a Hall of Fame career, but it is a little bit more. So the competition pool extends outside of just the NBA, whereas with like football, for example, it's pretty much just the NFL. Again, I get it. It does lead to a lot of guys with like very good, but maybe not like unbelievably amazing careers getting in. And there's also the case of like some Euro guys who rack up accomplishments out there who maybe couldn't have done that in the NBA. Getting in. So it's a little wonky, but I do think it's a little bit more understandable than people think. The other thing is that this is, again, what I think will happen, not what I think should happen. So even if you disagree with some of them off principle of like, they shouldn't be allowed in if it were up to me, I'm not saying what I think should happen. I'm saying what I think will happen. And also, if I call it the NBA Hall of Fame, and I will call it the NBA Hall of Fame, and I probably already have, just know, I know it's the Basketball Hall of Fame. get it mixed up. I think everybody does. That being said, long disclaimer. Let's get into it. So I've got them sorted into tiers. We're going to start with the most obvious guys, and then it's going to get progressively more and more like borderline, more and more debatable. And there's only 3 guys in the no question tier. I'm not going to spend a long time on this one. LeBron, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant. I've never seen anyone try to make an argument that any of these guys shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. That's why they're in the no question tier. When I say no question, I mean no question as in nobody questions them except for, insane haters. But to be in this tier where nobody will question you, you have to be like a top 25 player ever. Like you have to be an unbelievably good player. It's incredibly hard to have nobody question you. And there's maybe a few more guys in the next tier where you could throw them in this one. I haven't, gone out and posted each one as, so-and-so a Hall of Famer and see if anyone will bite and be like, no way. But these guys, MVP, finals MVP, been the best player in the world at some point in their career, probably. The next tier we have is very easily in. I think all of these guys have essentially no argument against them being in the Hall of Fame. But if you were to talk about them, I'm sure you can find somebody to disagree with each one. Again, you can move a couple of them up a tier if you wanted to. But a lot of these guys are all-time great players with ridiculous resumes. But a lot of them are lacking being the best player on a championship team. And unfortunately, a lot of that has to do with getting lucky. Like I know a lot of people hate to say that ring culture is like pretty prevalent, in the NBA. But just because you didn't reach that bar doesn't mean you're not a Hall of Famer. And I think people overestimate the number of guys who actually achieve being the best player on a championship team. It's pretty low. I was looking at, I think probably the top 13 players in the last 50 years or so have been the best player on like 35 of the however many championship teams. Like there's probably 20 guys who have done it in the last 40 years, maybe. So you'd have to let in less than a player a year if you wanted to keep that standard. Chris Paul, obviously had a ridiculous career. Russell Westbrook, he's getting a lot of hate because he's on the Lakers right now and he's kind of, taking a step back and, he has regressed a lot, but he won an MVP. He's got how many All-NBA teams? Be realistic. Dwight Howard, I think Dwight Howard suffers a little bit because his prime kind of ended a little quickly, but and I think a lot of people on Twitter are maybe a little bit too young to remember how good Dwight Howard was. And granted, I was like 9 in 2010, so I guess I was too. But go back and watch. He was the best player on a team that made it to the finals. Granted, because in 2009 LeBron's team was terrible, but he had a ridiculous career. Kawhi Leonard is not in the no question category because he has like weird longevity stats. Like, is the Andrew Wiggins more points stat still true? He just hasn't played that much, but he has 2 finals MVPs. And even if he didn't have 2 finals MVPs, he'd probably still be a Hall of Famer. James Harden, another easy in, won an MVP, pretty long prime. Carmelo Anthony, they're not leaving Carmelo Anthony out. If you've got 10 All-Stars, a decade of being a top 25 player in the best league in the world, you're easily in the Hall of Fame. Giannis, again, the reason why he's not in the no question category is because he has not progressed through his career long enough. But if you wanted to say, I don't know if anybody would question him, but as his career goes on, obviously, I think he's going to enter that category because he does have that best player on the championship team thing. Damian Lillard, he was ranked as like a top 75 player all time. I think he was on some Portland teams that never really surrounded him with a championship supporting cast, but they made some serious runs. They made some noise. He's got the accolades for it pretty easily, no question. And then Anthony Davis here too. He was an integral part of a championship run, and that's the big thing about rings. Being a part of a championship run matters, but you can't, like, being a role player on those teams is less about how good you were and more about being in the right place at the right time a lot of the time. So I don't think the NBA values it very much when you are, a 2-time, 3-time champion as a role player versus, a 2-time, 3-time champion as like one of the best 2 or 3 players on that team. Anthony Davis was one of the best 2 or 3 players on that team, and he very easily could have won Finals MVP. I'm a big LeBron fan saying that. I don't know. Does he have a Defensive Player of the Year? I don't think he does, but he's been very close. 4 All-NBA teams, 8 All-Stars. That's getting you there, I'm afraid. And it's starting to look, I don't want to have this video age badly, but it's starting to look like maybe injuries might cut him out a little early here as of September 19th, 2022, 3:03 p.m. But even if he doesn't bounce back, he's a Hall of Famer. There isn't an argument against it. Now we get to a lot more debatable of a tier. I'm calling it borderline-ish, in the sense that if you are arguing against any one of these guys not being a Hall of Famer, I can see your point, but I still feel pretty strong that all of these guys will get in. And I would be very surprised if any of them didn't. I think the big thing to keep in mind for the NBA Hall of Fame is like, okay, well, what's the benchmark you have to do to get in there? And the answer is about 5 All-Stars, about 3 All-NBA teams. That's when the conversation starts. If you have less than that, you needed to do something really special. If you have more than that, there's a pretty good chance you're in. Chris Webber got in recently, although he was on those Michigan teams, and that counts, and that definitely helped him. Tim Hardaway got in, and he had 5 All-Stars, 3 All-NBA teams. If you do that, you might have to wait a while. You're not going to be first ballot necessarily, but if you do that, you've got a pretty solid shot to get in. So going to these guys, Luka is on here, and he's had a very short career, but people have made this point, and I agree. The overseas stuff is what does it for him. He accomplished so much before he even came to the NBA. Go look at his Wikipedia page. I think they'd let him in. If you wanted to argue against that with me, fair enough. But the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame does count that. And I do think that with how much he did, they'd get him in. On top of that, he's been one of the best players. On top of that, he's already sitting on 3 All-Stars, 3 All-NBA teams. So I think he's got such a short career right now. So it's tough to be like, yeah, he'd be in the Hall of Fame. But I really, really think they'd let him in. And he's been so good when he's been in the NBA too. Like, it's not like he's just been, he had some nice overseas stuff. And then he was like a 3-time All-Star. He's one of the best players in the world already. So he would get in. Klay Thompson, sitting around that 5 All-Star, 3 All-NBA mark. He might have 2, but he's a great defensive player. And he was an integral part of one of the best teams of all time, or the best team of all time. I don't see any way that they don't let Klay in eventually, based off, his importance to that team. Like, maybe kind of a good example is Dennis Rodman, who didn't rack up the individual, like, All-Star, All-NBA accolades, although he got some other ones. But he was an integral part of a bunch of important teams, and that really helped get him in. You'll see a similar thing with Klay Thompson. Jokic is on here. He's a 2-time MVP. The longevity is super short, but I think with 2 MVPs and 2 deserved MVPs, in my opinion, he's going to get into. Blake Griffin is like, maybe I'm Blake Griffin's strongest soldier. That's what I'll say. I talked about this on TikTok and I talked about this on Twitter, and like most people thought I was nuts. And I think it's because I understand it, because his career, his prime ended so much shorter than you would think a Hall of Fame player's prime would end, right? You think he'd need to go longer. And I get that because he had the injury stuff and he's more of like, athleticism was a big part of his game, and that doesn't pair well. So you would think that he hadn't quite gotten there. But what you got to remember is that A, Blake Griffin in his prime was awesome, and B, Blake Griffin was in his prime like right away. Off the top of your head, what accolades do you think he's sitting on? And I know I'm talking like accolades, but that's what matters when it comes to getting into the Hall of Fame. He's got 6 All-Stars, 5 All-NBA teams. The number of guys who have gotten to 5 All-NBA teams is under 80, and I just looked at it, and Chris Webber was on there, so I guess he didn't have 3, and I was wrong about that. But I think that's going to end up getting you in. And I think you go and look at the guys on that list, and I'm not seeing many guys who aren't making the Hall. You have to you're a top 15 player basically in the world for half a decade. You're going to be in the Pro Basketball Hall of Fame. Now, keep in mind that just because somebody is going to make the Hall of Fame doesn't mean that they won't have to wait. Blake Griffin's going to have to wait. There's Amari Stoudemire is probably a comparable player vaguely to him, and he hasn't gotten in yet, but I believe in due time, he probably will. And just with Blake Griffin, it's definitely not a certain lock, but I feel pretty decent about it. It also doesn't help Blake Griffin that his legacy is kind of, those failed Clippers teams that should have won more than they did. But I don't think the NBA is going to ding players that much for that type of stuff, maybe as much as like NBA fans will. Jimmy Butler, he's starting to rack up the personal accolades, and he's been the best player on a team that made the finals, and he was a shot away from doing it twice. This is another guy who I think is going to have to wait maybe a little bit, depending on how the rest of his career plays. He's got some more gas in the tank. He can definitely get up there to the point where they're not going to make him wait that much. Like he kind of came along a little bit slower than maybe most Hall of Famers would. But I think what he's done with the Heat and the fact that he goes to the Timberwolves, this is his legacy. He goes to the Timberwolves, they're the best they've been in a long time. Goes to the 76ers, that's the best version of the 76ers. He goes to the Heat, they're great. Like if he's just a winner, I'm afraid. Joel Embiid is, again, just clearing that 5 All-Star, 3 All-NBA threshold. I think if his career ended today, he'd have to wait a while. But there's also the thing that you would keep in the back of your mind is that second in MVP voting 2 times, and he doesn't have a first-team All-NBA. He's gotten hosed. He's gotten hosed accolades-wise. But I think that if you kept in mind that he was, that close to winning MVP 2 times. It's not only, there's a big gap between a first team All-NBA being second in MVP voting and like a third team sneaking in. Embiid's on the higher end of that, so I feel like he would get in. LaMarcus Aldridge, I don't have too much to say about him. I think he did a little bit more in his career than people think. I think people are, a little bit short-term memory, remembering who he is now rather than who he was on those Portland teams. Those Portland teams should have been a lot better than they were. They got hosed by injury. But I think he's got it. So we're getting to the last 2 guys here, and they're both going to have to get in off their defense. For Draymond, I feel like most people would agree with him. He's one of the best defenders of all time, and he still is a great defender. I mean, I think he would have won Defensive Player of the Year if he hadn't gotten injured this year. And while, he's not what he once was, and this finals recently with the offensive problems they were having with him definitely kind of like moved him down in the public image maybe a hair. But they're not winning nearly as much without him. And don't forget how good he was in 2016. He had legitimately a very high peak. So it's again with the Klay Thompson stuff. Maybe you think he's just a hair short on what a Hall of Famer would be, but I think he was just so important to those Warriors teams, and those Warriors teams are so important to NBA history that he is going to get in. Like 4 All-Stars, 2 All-NBA teams, not great. You got a DPOY, you got 4 NBA championships, at least 3 of those. Now, all 4 you were easily incredibly important to the team. 7 all-defensive teams and a steals champ. Yeah, he's getting in. And then you get to Rudy Gobert, who has an interesting case right now. Maybe he should be down a tier. Maybe he should be in the next one. But I do think they're going to eventually let him in. And I am not particularly high on Gobert. I kind of do think the playoff flaws are legit, but 4 All-NBA teams and 3 DPOYs is a pretty strong argument. And I'll be 100% honest with you. I think the way that Defensive Player of the Year works, where it's just about the regular season, it's not about any playoff struggles. Who is the most impactful defender? A lot of the times it's been Rudy Gobert, and he hasn't won it. You could argue that he's been robbed of a few. I think that you saw Ben Wallace took a while, and then eventually he made it in. I think you could see a similar thing with Gobert. Maybe he needs to do it for a few more years. And I think this Timberwolves team, again, I don't want this video to age bad. I think this Timberwolves team might have a pretty good regular season here. And if their defense is super, super good, he might get another one. And then if he's got 4 Defensive Players of the Year and he's one of, the all-time great defensive players, they're going to let him in. He already is one of the all-time great defensive players. So I do think Rudy gets in, but there's maybe a pretty strong argument against him where you could say with the playoffs not being where they were and Ben Wallace was on a championship team. Actually, I'll say that I do think Gobert sneaks in eventually, but maybe he should be down a tier. If his career were to end today, maybe he should be down a tier. But keep in mind, a lot of these guys also have more valuable years to play. So we could sit here and debate forever whether or not Joel Embiid would get in if his career ended today. Well, it probably isn't going to. Like, he's probably going to get some more, and then he'll be, easily in. Or maybe Draymond Green gets another ring, or Jimmy Butler makes another finals appearance, or, Jokic, I'm figuring, is going to have another good game at some point. And that brings us to the next tier, which is the true borderline guys. I am not 100% confident on any of them. And if any of them get in, it's probably going to take them a long time. So first we've got Kevin Love, and I think I would lean no with him. His prime was like really, really, really short. You can go look at his accolades. Probably about 5 All-Stars or so. And that's partially because he went and became a third option on that Cavs team, but him being a third option on a championship team does speak a little bit to, exactly how good he was. Don't get me wrong, he was very good with the Timberwolves, but he's right at that threshold where maybe, you start to debate it, right? His big argument for why you would let him in is what? Well, he was one of the best three players on one of the most important championship teams ever. Like that 2016 Cavs win, getting Cleveland won against the Warriors, it was a big deal. The problem is that he did not play good in that series. So how can you say that the thing that pushes him over the top is the final series he didn't play good in? It's tough to say that. And I understand he did a lot more for the team than just the box score shows, but he really did have an off series. So I think that if he had gone off and he had been the one dropping 41 with LeBron, maybe that does push him in eventually. And maybe still he gets in eventually. But I think if he doesn't do something more, he's probably not going to get it. Rajon Rondo, another really weird career. He's a little short on the accolades, but he's got like a steals champion, I think. He's got an assist champion, I think. He's been pretty decent for, a while. Although we're kind of coming down to the end of it. I just think that Celtics team that he won on was a little bit too stacked for people to give him like a lion's share of the credit for that, although he was a very important player on that team. But, I think most people would agree he's probably the fourth best player on that team. And if his prime had gone a little bit longer, maybe he'd be on it. He's done some other stuff like, he's got an all-defensive team, steals champ, assist champ. But I think he's just a one-time All-NBA star. I don't think his longevity was good enough. I don't think his peak was good enough to get him in. Kyle Lowry is also an interesting one. He was an integral part of that Toronto championship team, and that team was a very big deal. So that helps him a lot. But again, I think that maybe the peak is not quite long enough for him. The number of one All-NBA selection guys that are getting in off of what mostly would be their, NBA career is going to be a little rough. And maybe I'm not considering enough for these guys, them being good in college too. But you also have to keep in mind that a lot of NBA players were also good in college. Then I've got Joe Johnson. Again, this is the problem with all of these guys is that their peak might not have been quite long enough. Now, Joe Johnson, I'm pretty sure racked up like 7 All-Stars, and he pushed back his eligibility date for the Hall of Fame way far in the future by playing 2 minutes with the Celtics this year. Although I think that's pretty cool. I was looking at everyone's accolades on Basketball Reference, and it's like 36-year-old season, and then you go to the next one, it's 40, and he played 2 minutes and he got a bucket. So I don't know. I actually think that he has a decent shot. There's not a lot of guys who get to 7 All-Stars. Then you're really pushing it. He was a great scorer at a time where scoring was not all that easy. So Joe Johnson, I think, has a fighting chance to get in way far in the future. And then you have DeMar DeRozan. Now, DeMar DeRozan can still put in some work and kind of change the tide on this. But here is my thought on him. DeMar DeRozan is sitting right at that threshold right now. But his legacy, unfortunately, is not that great. So he's got 3 All-NBA teams, 5 All-Stars. How many times have I said that this video? But he is not a playoff riser at all, and I do think that matters. And he is kind of known as the guy that Toronto had to trade away to win a championship. Not entirely. That's not his legacy. I don't want to say that about him, but that's definitely something that did end up happening. So I think DeRozan is still fighting. I think he's still got a shot. If he puts up a couple more nice seasons with the Bulls, he can do it. But I don't know if he's going to be able to repeat what he did last year because he was going berserk last year. And then the other guy, I don't know if I put him on this graphic or the next one, but he should be on this one, is Derrick Rose. I don't know what to make of him. He won an MVP, but he was good for a very, very ridiculously short amount of time for an MVP. How much are they going to value that? I have no idea what the Hall of Fame is going to do. So that one, I can't tell you. Debate in the comments. Is the longevity too bad, or do you have to give it to an MVP? I'd maybe lean no, but I could be convinced otherwise. So these are the type of guys that, as of right now, again, they maybe have to wait, 25 years or whatever it is, but will probably pop up in conversations every once in a while. I think these are the real borderline guys. And then last one, missed the cut. Just a few guys. I'm not going to put everybody on here. DeMarcus Cousins, prime wasn't long enough. Andre Iguodala, he has a bunch of rings. He has a Finals MVP. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he should be in true borderline too. But I think a lot of his rings, he was just not like, he was not a top 3 player on any of those teams. And I know he has a finals MVP, but he wasn't the best player in that series. And I think that's pretty widely accepted. I mean, we're talking about a guy who's a one-time All-Star. If we're looking at the personal accolades, I don't know if he gets there. I mean, and when it comes to the rings, and that's a big part of the argument, I know that Iguodala was important to those teams, but he slowly started trending more towards role player for them in the later years, especially this last year. Like this most recent championship that he's won, great. You know, I don't want to take that away from him, but I do think that like a role player ring doesn't move your Hall of Fame case. So I think with Iguodala, I don't think they will, but I guess I can see the argument with the finals MVP. But for me, he missed the cut. Kemba Walker, again, the prime was too short. Al Horford, just not quite there with him. I know the stuff at Florida. I know people are hyping him up like if he won finals MVP. I think he's Hall of Very good. And I think at Florida, it wasn't like he led those Florida teams to national championships. He was an important part of the team, but I don't know. He's not quite there for me, even though he's extended his career and become a really strong, important role player for the Celtics. And then John Wall, again, the career cut short a little bit, or the prime cut short a little bit, I mean. But again, I mean, all of these guys could do something and change that. And that's true for anybody on this list or anybody not on this list. If I didn't put somebody on missed the cut, that probably means that they just weren't close enough to that, accolade threshold I've spent the entire video talking about. I'm pretty sure that I didn't miss anybody I meant to talk about, but as I was going through these graphics, I realized that I was missing a few names. So there is a chance that I was missing somebody I did not mean to. If that's the case, and somebody comments it, I'll pin it or something, or I'll like it or something. But I really don't think I did. But if I did, I reserve the right to be a little wrong or to missed one player. That being said, I appreciate you guys sticking all the way through this video. Let me know what you guys think. I'm interested. I think talking about the Hall of Fame for basketball is pretty fun, just because of how much disagreement there is with all this stuff. So I want to hear what you guys think. Do all the other stuff you're supposed to do on YouTube videos, comment, like, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next time.